quiet. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 25th anniversary of Prison Legal News. Thanks for coming to celebrate the Prison Legal News and the Human Rights Defense Center. I'm John Mitchley. I'm an attorney who has worked with Paul Wright in Prison Legal News over the years, and I'm honored, and it's my pleasure to be part of honoring the work of PLN and HRDC. PLN has always been in the forefront of real change and true reform in prisons, and has fought very hard for a fair deal, not only for prisoners, but for prisoners' families. And it's really, I'm very proud to be part of this celebration and to be associated with Prison Legal News for all these years. A little bit later, I'll introduce Paul Wright, who's been the driving force behind Prison Legal News for all 25 years. And be happy to introduce Paul, who will talk to you after our featured speaker. But first, it's my great honor to introduce our featured speaker for tonight, John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou is a great speaker to have at this event for two reasons. The first reason is that John Kiriakou is a former CIA official who is the only CIA official who has ever talked publicly about the torture regime that unfortunately and illegally was created after the 9/11 attacks. John Kiriakou in 2007, in an interview on ABC News and in other outlets, talked about waterboarding and other torture. He was investigated for many years after that, and 5 years later, he was charged by the government with several counts under the Espionage Act for his actions in outing the prison regime. He eventually served 30 months in prison on one of those counts. He avoided, if he'd been convicted on all of the counts, it would have been about 45 years in prison. He served 30 months in prison for his courage in talking about waterboarding and torture. And in talking to him today, I asked him, has anybody else in the CIA ever talked about it? And he said, no, no one ever has. He's also here tonight to speak to you because he's become a great advocate for prison reform. While he was in prison at Loretto Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, he wrote what you can find on the internet now called Letters from Loretto. His first letter from Loretto is really kind of a famous letter about prison life at Loretto. And he has, by writing these letters from Loretto and talking about what it's really like to be in prison and being well known because of his having outed the torture regime, John has informed a lot of people about prison conditions and practices who would not have known about it before. And this is a crucial part of prison reform, is more and more people knowing about what goes on in prisons. I worked for many years, and not so much recently, but for a long time in prison reform litigation. And just bringing out what happens in prisons is one of the first steps in changing them, because people don't know what goes on inside prisons. And it makes a huge difference for people to out those things. And so John has also done that and has been a great advocate for prison reform. John Kiriakou has received the Joe A. Calloway Award for Civic Courage, given to individuals who advance truth and justice despite the personal risk it creates. She also received the PEN First Amendment Award, PEN being probably the leading national literary organization in the United States, PEN First Amendment Award, and was named Peacemaker of the Year by the Peace and Justice Center of Sonoma County, California. He's the author of not only the Loretto Letters, but The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror. I also wanted to mention that John refused to be even trained in the torture techniques when he was at the CIA. He never participated in the torture. He knew of it, but did not participate in it. So it's my great honor and pleasure to invite to speak to you tonight, John Kiriakou.
John. I have a lot of people to thank, but I'll make that part short by saying thank you to Paul Wright and to the Human Rights Defense Center and to Prison Legal News. Prison Legal News became very important to me in prison. I was telling Paul today at lunch that every month when Prison Legal News would arrive, we could pack 10 or 12 people into my cell, and I would sit and read aloud the news and brief, and talk about all the stupid things that prison guards had done the previous month to get themselves arrested and humiliated in print. We got a real kick out of that. It gave us many hours of great levity, pleasure. So thank you at least for news and brief. I give a lot of speeches. I travel around the country and I speak a lot. And it's usually, these speeches are usually about torture and about ethics and intelligence operations and things like that. And I'm so steeped in it, I can usually wing it. I can't wing something like this. And when Paul invited me to speak, I jumped at the chance. But I've taken this very seriously, and I've thought over the course of weeks of why do I feel so strongly about prison leaders? And I realized finally that it's because in prison, even if you have a family on the outside, even if you have friends, friends who write to you, friends who email you, or even come and visit you, you're still basically alone. You've done your crime, or you've not done your crime, whatever the case happens to be. And on the outside, people's lives continue to move forward, and yours doesn't. You're in this weird kind of suspended animation. But I knew because of Prison Legal News that wasn't true. I knew that there were people at the Human Rights Defense Center who were writing and suing people and speaking publicly and going to news outlets and talking about these really important issues. Issues like the prison industrial complex, human rights, civil liberties, and why these things are so important, all the while being ignored by the mainstream media. So that's why PLN was so important to me, and not just to me, but to dozens of people in my units or my prison, and thousands of people across the country, whether they're prisoners or former prisoners or family members and friends of prisoners. We knew that Prison Legal News was there for us, that we were not forgotten. By way of background, I was, as John Dishley said, I was incarcerated on a national security charge. And when you're arrested and charged with espionage, and the Attorney General himself personally announces your arrest, you have the entire weight of the U.S. government crashing down on your shoulders. It's one of the most horrible crimes I can even imagine being charged with. And there it was, espionage. But what does espionage mean? It means spying on your government, right? It means spying for a foreign country, passing classified information to an enemy. I did none of that. So, by way of background, I wanted to tell you what happened in my case, and why what happened in my case has furthered my interest in prison reform and sentencing reform. I joined the CIA in 1990, just out of graduate school, January of 1990. And I spent the first 7 years of my career as an analyst, working on the Middle East. I got bored halfway through and decided I wanted to do something more exciting, see more of the world. I spoke both Greek and Arabic at the time, and so I switched over not just to operations, but to counterterrorism operations, which were the most exciting and the most dangerous things that the CIA was doing at the time. After the September 11th attacks, I was named the chief of counterterrorism operations in Pakistan. And so I arrived in Pakistan just at the end of the bombing of Tora Bora, when Al-Qaeda fighters were streaming across the border from Afghanistan to escape the bombing. And so my job was to capture them as they were coming into Pakistan. we decided at the time that it was easier to let them come into the country and then to wrap them up in safe houses once they got themselves situated and comfortable. It was easier to catch them in safe houses. So I had been in Pakistan about 2 months, and I received a cable from CIA headquarters saying that Abu Zubaydah was somewhere in Pakistan and we had to catch him. At the time, the CIA believed that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. That turned out to not exactly be true, but still he was a bad guy, and he was a senior person, at least affiliated or associated with Al-Qaeda, and my job was to find him and capture him. So it took 6 weeks, but we found him and we captured him. During the capture, he was shot 3 times by a Pakistani policeman in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach, and he was very gravely wounded. So we took him to a hospital, and to make a very long story very short, the doctors there patched him up, at least enough so he wasn't bleeding to death, which was a real concern for us. And I sat with him next to his bed. I tied him to the bed. I sat with him for 56 hours. And in those 56 hours, we kind of got to know each other. I mean, I never thought that I would engage in these long-term conversations with the leader of Al-Qaeda, but that's just how it worked out. After asking me to kill him, to smother him with a pillow, we ended up talking about religion, poetry. He cried a lot. He said he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. I kind of yelled at him. And I said, look, what did you think we were going to do when you flew planes into the World Trade Center? Did you not think we would come after you? 50,000 people were working in these buildings. What did you think was going to happen? And he said, I didn't want to attack the United States on 9/11. I wanted to attack Israel. He said, I wanted to kill Jews. But I was overruled, he said. Bin Laden insisted that the attack be in the United States. So after the 56 hours, we were getting ready to put him on a plane to go to his onward destination, which turned out to be a secret prison. And I said to him, I'm going to give you some advice. I said, I am the nicest guy that you're going to encounter in this experience. My colleagues are not as nice as I am. So if I can give you one piece of advice, it's that you have to cooperate. I told him, your life is over. You're going to die in prison. But the rest of your life can be easy or it can be terrible. I said, I don't know what they have planned for you, but I can tell you it's not going to be nice. And he said, you seem like a nice guy, but you're the enemy, and I'll never cooperate. I said, best of luck. We loaded him onto the plane, and I never saw him again. I got back to CIA headquarters about 6 weeks later, and I was in the cafeteria, and a senior officer of the CIA's counterterrorism center came up to me, and he said, hey, I'm glad I ran into you. Wanted to ask you, do you want to be certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques? I said, what's that mean, enhanced interrogation techniques? And very animatedly, he says, we're going to start getting rough with these guys. I said, well, what's that supposed to be about? And he said, well, we came up with these 10 techniques we're going to start using. And he told me what these 10 techniques were. And I said, ooh, I said, that sounds like torture. Torture's illegal in the United States. I said, I don't think I want to be involved in that. But I said, you know what? Let me think about it. So instead of having lunch, I went up to the executive floor at the CIA. There was a very senior CIA officer there with whom I was very friendly. I had worked for him briefly in the Middle East years earlier, a decade earlier. And I said, hey, what do you think about this? They just came up to me and asked me if I wanted to be trained in these techniques. And he said, first, let's call it what it is. They can use whatever euphemism they want, but it's torture. And torture is a slippery slope. And what's going to happen is somebody's going to go overboard, they're going to kill a prisoner during an interrogation, there's going to be a congressional investigation, and then there's going to be a Justice Department investigation, and somebody's going to go to prison. Do you want to go to prison? I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. It turned out I was the only one who went to prison. But that day I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. So I went back down and said, I don't want any part of this. It's torture, I have a problem with it, I don't want to be involved. And almost immediately they began torturing Abu Zubaydah. And it wasn't just Abu Zubaydah. We had begun capturing other very senior al-Qaeda officials, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. We captured Abdurrahim al-Hashimi, who was the mastermind of the Cole bombing. Ramzi bin Ashib was another one. So we could probably agree to disagree on a couple of these techniques. Like if I grab you by the shirt and I say, hey, you answer my questions, that's probably not torture. And I think most Americans probably would say that's not torture. But most of these other techniques were clearly torture. In fact, we have a very clearly defined torture law in this country. It's called the Federal Torture Act. And it defines torture. And the definition of torture is exactly what we were doing doing to these guys. We're also signatories to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which we wrote. And this was also clearly a violation of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. So, much has been made of waterboarding. There were other techniques that were being used against prisoners that I always thought were even worse than waterboarding. One of them was called the cold cell, where we would strip a prisoner naked, chain him through an eye bolt in the ceiling so he couldn't get comfortable, and then chill his cell to 50 degrees, and every hour somebody would go in and throw ice water on him. We killed 3 people using that technique. Okay? People who were never afforded the benefit of a trial, never met their accusers in court, and indeed were never even charged with a crime. We killed them. Another one was sleep deprivation. Former Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld famously said that, he didn't even have a chair in his office. He had a stand-up desk, and he would stand, and he was up for days at a time, and he didn't have any problem with sleep deprivation. Well, Don Rumsfeld wasn't kept awake forcibly with cold water and blaring hard rock music and lights for as long as 21 consecutive days. You lose your mind around day 7. Some of those prisoners were never able to recover their faculties, and even today, all these years later, are not able to participate in their own defenses. So I was watching all of this happen, and I couldn't really say anything because the people who were read into the torture program were so few. This program was so compartmentalized and so secret that I couldn't even complain to coworkers about what was happening because they didn't know. My wife was a longtime CIA officer, and I couldn't even talk to her about it, so I kept it to myself. In 2007, I got a call from Brian Ross at ABC News, and he said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I never laid a hand on Abu Zubaydah or on anybody else. I said, your source is wrong. And he pulled an old reporter's trick and said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. I said, I'll think about it. That week, President George W. Bush gave a press conference in which he looked directly in the camera and said, we do not torture. I said to my wife, that's a damn lie, and he knows it. A couple of days later, and this really upset me, he told another reporter, we don't torture, but if there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I said, that's a lie to me. So I called Brian Ross and I said, I'll do your interview. And I knew I was putting my wife in a bad position, but I said, I'm just going to tell the truth. And whatever happens, I'm confident that if I tell the truth, everything's going to be okay. So I went on ABC News and I said 3 things that utterly changed the course of the rest of my life. I said the CIA was torturing its prisoners. Torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue officer. And that the president had personally signed the order to torture prisoners, thereby calling the President of the United States a bald-faced liar on national television. Within 24 hours, the CIA filed what's called a crimes report against me with the Justice Department, and the FBI began investigating me. The investigation took more than 4 years. And they finally charged me with 3 counts of espionage, 1 count of violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act of 1982. I'm only the 2nd American ever to be charged with that crime. And making a false statement, which I still don't know what a false statement is supposed to be. I hadn't committed this. In fact, in one of my hearings, the prosecution was telling the judge that these were grave national security crimes. They were seeking 45 years in prison. And one of my attorneys got up and objected. He said, Your Honor, Mr. Kiriakou hasn't committed espionage. I mean, the charges, the Justice Department said that the information that I had revealed, not on the ABC News interview, but to a reporter from the New York Times, was so highly classified that it was several levels above top secret. It was code word protected information. And that it was declassified solely for the purpose of prosecuting me. And that information was, right, top secret code word information. That information was that after September 11th, the CIA was trying to kill or capture members of Al-Qaeda. Top secret information. Espionage charges. So she threw them out. And she threw out the false statement charge. I still don't know what that false statement charge was. In any event, I still decided I couldn't roll the dice. I had 5 children at home. My wife was fired from the CIA the day of my arrest only because she was married to me. There was a sitting U.S. Senator, Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, who said on NPR that I should be executed for what I had done. That I had humiliated the president, I had disclosed national security secrets, and to him, that constituted the very definition of treason, and that I should be executed for that ABC News interview. So, with public opinion kind of running against me at the time, I decided to take a plea. And I took a plea to violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act of 1982. I had confirmed the name of a former colleague to a reporter who never published the name. The name has never been made public. The judge said that if she could have, she would have given me 10 years in prison, and that I should be ashamed of myself for confirming this name. But she didn't know the name, because it had never been made public. And she couldn't give me 10 years, so tough luck for her. I ended up getting 2.5. So I went to the Federal Correctional Institution in Loretto, Pennsylvania. I thought I was going to camp, right? Minimum security. The judge said, camp. The prosecution said, sure, camp. I got to the prison. I said, hi, I'm John Kiriakou. I'm here to turn myself in. My attorneys are waiting. They dropped me off. Good luck. I said, thank you. I said, okay, I'm turning myself in. They said, all right, let's go over here. I said, no, I'm supposed to go to camp. Over here. They said, not according to our paper. I said, you're putting me in the actual prison? That was a big deal. And they put me in the actual prison. And I decided that very day that I was going to exercise my constitutional right to freedom of speech to its maximum. I knew that I had a limited amount of time. I figured I would be out in 2 years or less, and I could live on the surface of the moon for 2 years. I was saying at lunch today with John and Paul and a couple of other people that several of the prison guards got in my face virtually as soon as I got there. My first meal in the cafeteria, one called me scum, another one called me a traitor. And I said to one of the lieutenants, listen, I have gone head to head with Al-Qaeda, with Hezbollah, with the Iranians, with some idiot divorce attorney, and I'm supposed to be afraid of you? Give me a little credit. And so they generally backed off. But they didn't back off for other people. And so I started documenting what I saw. And I would tell them, my cellmates, people in my unit, friends that I had made, they can't talk to you like this. There are regulations for this kind of stuff. You know, they can't lock you out of your room. They can't take you to solitary for nothing. They can't threaten you. They can't take away your visits. There are regulations. And I would go to the law library and I would print these regulations. And I remember telling one cop, hey, listen, if you want me to live by the rules, you're going to have to live by the rules too. Well, they didn't think that I would write about it, but I did. And I kept writing about it. My cousin actually came to visit me one weekend and collected some very valuable intelligence from me. I had written my first letter from Loretto in which I came right out and accused 2 investigators in the prison's Special Investigative Service of committing a felony against me. What they had done is, I'd been in prison about 5 days, and they called me to the lieutenant's office. And I had been told my very first day, if you're called to the lieutenant's office, it's only because you're going to go to solitary. So I thought, oh my God. I gave my bunkie my wife's phone number. I said, if I'm not back in half an hour, tell her I'm in solitary, call the lawyers, I don't know what's going on. So I went to the SIS office. And they had a copy of my book on the desk. And they had copies of DVDs of documentaries I had appeared in over the years. And one of them pointed to a picture of a guy who looked like an Arab on his computer. He said, do you know this guy? And I said, yeah, I met him last night. What'd you say to him? I said, nice to meet you. What did he say to you? I said, is that nice to meet you? In Arabic? I said, yeah, in Arabic. And he said, well, as soon as you met each other, he called a number in Pakistan and they told him to kill you. I said, I could kill this guy with my thumb. Come on, the guy's this big, weighs 100 pounds. I said, give me a break. They said, no, we're looking for a reason to ship him out. He's the uncle of the Times Square bomber. I said, okay, all right. And thanks for the warning. I went about my business. And the more I thought about this, the more it didn't make any sense. First of all, they don't speak Arabic in Pakistan. And this guy didn't speak English. So why in the world would he call a number in Pakistan? It made no sense to me. And secondly, the Times Square bomber is in on a terrorism charge, and I recall his uncle was in on a conspiracy to commit terrorism charge. They wouldn't be in a low security prison. They would be in a maximum security penitentiary. So I went up to this guy, and he seemed very nervous as I walked up to him. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. After we talked, did you get called into the lieutenant's office? He said, yes. I said, why? He said, well, they told me that after we talked, you called a number in Washington and they told you to kill me. I said, amateur, ham-handed idiots. So I wrote about it. Well, I accused them of a felony. I accused them of conspiracy to incite violence in a federal facility. That's a felony. That letter from Loretto, that first one, got more than 1 million hits. More than 1 million hits. And the likes of, Jake Tapper from CNN came to the prison to interview me about it. And I accepted every single media request. Every single one. And I told the warden, I have a constitutional right to freedom of speech. And you cannot stop me from speaking to the press. Period. And he knew it was true. So after that first letter from Loretto, my cousin came to visit me. And he was sitting in the lobby. And he overheard 2 guards talking. One said, who's he here to see? The second guard said, Kiriaki. Oh, the CIA guy? Yeah. Why is he not in solitary? And the second CO said, I asked the warden that. And the warden said, we can't put him in solitary because he didn't use anybody's name. So my cousin told me this. I said, kid, this is a great piece of intelligence. I knew I could write anything I wanted. And if I didn't use their names, I could get away with it. So that's exactly what I did. And I wrote a series of what turned out to be 19 blogs, all called Letters from Loretto, which I hope will be published in the coming months. They're out for bid right now. I'm still waiting to hear back from my literary agent. One of the things that those Letters from Loretto did was it put me even more in tune with prison legal news. Where in the beginning, I would gather everybody together and we would read the news and brief. It became a very serious thing for me, and I would read every word in prison legal news. Once I started doing that, I realized the depth of the problems that we have in this country related to not just prison, everything having to do with prison. I mean, whether it's gouging prisoners for phone calls, or this abomination that is video visits, or solitary confinement. Coming back to the torture issue, the United Nations has declared solitary confinement to be a form of torture. But we make more use of solitary confinement than virtually any country in the world, save perhaps North Korea or Iran. Is that really the company that we want to be in? I would posit that it's not. Another issue that PLN has brought up over the years that I think most people have not focused on is the over-criminalization of our country. The New York Times published an article recently saying that just in the last 10 years, Congress has created 500 new crimes. This is things that were legal 10 years ago that are now felonies. There's a law professor at Harvard by the name of Harvey Silverglade who wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. And he posits that we are so over-criminalized in our country, we are so over-regulated, that the average person on the average day going about his or her normal business commits 3 felonies every single day. With the bottom line being, if they want to get you, they're going to get you. And there's nothing you can do about it. ProPublica, the investigative journalism site, in November of 2012, published a study saying that the Justice Department wins 98.2% of its cases, almost all of which are a result of plea bargains. That's not justice. As an aside, when I was working on Iraq at the CIA, Saddam Hussein would win 98% of the presidential vote. We would say, "Ha, it's fixed." The Justice Department wins 98%. We say, "Wow, they're geniuses." But it was Prison Legal News that introduced me to these issues. Another thing that Prison Legal News has shown me is, despite the fact that most Americans think that we have not just a civilized country, but live in a shining city on a hill, as Mario Cuomo famously said in 1984, was that is just not the case. Prison Legal News publishes articles routinely, on a regular basis, about sadistic behavior on the part of corrections officers and even prison administrators. The New York Times said recently, it was in a New York Times Magazine article in May of this year, that in ADX Florence, one prisoner was eating glass to try to kill himself. And the Bureau of Prisons said, "Oh, he's just doing it to get attention. It's not a mental disorder. Trust us." But we wouldn't know about these kinds of things without Prison Legal News. I told the story at lunch that I'm going to tell you again. When I was in prison, I became very friendly with the Italians. Mostly named Gambino, Lucchese, Genovese, Banana. You get the idea. And one of the Italians, he became my closest friend. His name was Mark. Mark engaged a particularly sadistic cop who went by the nickname Blue in conversation. And Blue was the only corrections officer who wore a scab vest underneath his jacket because he was such a dick. He knew that eventually somebody was going to try to shame him. So my friend Mark said, "Hey Blue, where do you work in this quarter?" And Blue said, "Central 1 unit." And Mark said, "Oh, my friend John lives in Central 1. And Blue said, "Oh, the CIA guy?" He said, "I never mess with that guy, never." Mark said, "Really, why?" And Blue said, "That's all I need, to work an 8-hour shift in this dump and go out to my car and CNN is standing next to it." And I said to Mark when he told me this story, "You're damn right CNN's going to be standing next to it, and then it's going to be in PLN, and his career is toast, and he knows it." I had another experience beginning when I first arrived in prison that made me realize that I had a soapbox with other prisoners, or a soapbox that other prisoners didn't have, and that I could make real use out of it. When you first go to prison, you are hit in the face, figuratively speaking, with every racial stereotype you've ever denied existed. Blacks are segregated, Hispanics are segregated, whites are segregated, and there's almost no cooperation between them. And it was just so odd to me that everything was based on race. Where you sit in the cafeteria, where you sit in the TV room, what TV shows you watch. It was crazy to me. So I made a point not to respect these racial boundaries. I just pretended that they didn't exist. I had friends who were black. I sat on the black side of the TV room, for example. I had friends who were Hispanic. But I was in a fortunate position because when I got to prison, or even before I got to prison, I already had a reputation as sort of the human rights guy. About a week after I got there, several members of the Nation of Islam came into my cell holding a newspaper. I was panicked momentarily because I had been told if someone enters your cell without being invited, it's an act of aggression. And I thought, geez, I'm 50 years old. These guys are 20-something years old. They're built like Olympic wrestlers. And then one of them said, no, take it easy. Just wanted to tell you, and he hands me the paper. Reverend Farrakhan says you're a hero of Muslim human rights. We want you to know that you're not going to have any problems with us. And I said, okay, great, thank you. The Aryans came into my cell. My first day, swastikas on their necks and faces. And all they wanted to know was I a rat? Was I gay? Was I a child molester? I said, no. They said, okay, then you can sit with us in the cafeteria. I said, okay, I guess I'm with the Aryans now. And then 4 of my 5 cellmates were not just Hispanic, but members of different Mexican drug cartels. And I helped one of them write a letter to his judge asking for a reduction in sentence. I know that's not how it works, but he asked me if I would. I said, fine. I figured it was good for goodwill. And so when the leader of the prison Hispanic gang, Pisces, asked about me, this cellmate said, no, he's okay. He did us a favor, and I knew I was good with the Hispanics. Finally, I lived across the hall from a senior captain in the Bonanno crime family, and he came over into my cell one day. He said, let me ask you a question. Why do you sit with those retards in the cafeteria? I said, I don't know. My first day, they asked me to sit with them. He says, from today, you're with the Italians. I said, great. So from then, I was with the Italians. So I never had any racial or ethnic problems when I was at Loretto. I did have problems with the guards. Like I say, on my first day, my first meal, one CO called me scum. Another one called me traitor. And others tried to set me up to commit a violent act against a perfectly innocent fellow prisoner. I didn't bite. What I didn't realize at the time was that other prisoners were watching this, and they were filing it. At one point, an African-American prisoner, whom I had not met, walked up to me after a guard said something. I don't even remember what he said. I remember it was offensive. And he said to me, don't worry about these guys. We know who you are. Don't worry about it. I said, great, I won't. And then 2 years later, in the several nights before my departure from prison, the Italians had a going away dinner for me. The Bloods had a going away dinner for me, which was really great. The Norteños, who I had never even heard of before, had a going away dinner for me. Burritos that were like this big, I'll never forget it. But the leader of the Bloods pulled me aside, and he said, listen, you have to be our voice out there. Nobody knows what it's like in here. They'll listen to you. And I told them, man, I promise that I will devote the rest of my life to prison reform, to educating the American people about what the Justice Department is doing in their name. I said, I don't think that it's, as the media would have you believe, that Americans are, get tough on crime, law and order. I think they just don't know. And I still believe that to be the case. I said, people have to know what prisons are like. They have to know what's going on inside. The government has created this oppressive system in the name of the American people, and Americans don't have any idea what's happening. I sometimes tell reporters, half-jokingly, that the government has turned me into a dissident. I don't really feel like a dissident. I feel like I actually haven't changed over the years. I feel like the government has changed over the years. And the government demonizes people. And they demonize people who have been convicted of crimes, rightly or wrongly. That has to change. When I was with the CIA, I did a 2-year rotation to the State Department. And I served in the American Embassy in Manama, Bahrain. It's a little teeny tiny country in the Persian Gulf. It's the same size and same population as Pittsburgh. And it's got like 10,000 royal family members, right? So you have all these rich, like super crazy rich royal family members, and then these very poor, oppressed, unemployable, semi-literate Shia Muslims. The royal family is Sunni. So as part of my job at the embassy, I was a human rights officer, and it was a position I embraced. Congress mandates that the State Department write a human rights report for every country in the world with which we have diplomatic relations. And so I was tasked with writing the Bahraini human rights report. Well, at the time, an uprising had begun. The Bahrainis called it an intifada. And the government was basically just killing people, just going out and scooping them up and beating them to death or shooting them or torturing them until they died. And I wrote about this. And it led to a temporary suspension of U.S. military aid to Bahrain. And this was all very well documented, but I told the Deputy Minister of the Interior, you can't just wantonly kill people. You can't tell a 15-year-old kid to come in for questioning and then call his father 6 hours later and tell him to come and pick up the body. That's just not what civilized countries do. But interestingly enough, and I'm talking about only 20 years ago, much of what the Bahrainis were doing in the 1990s to their own people, our own country now does to us or to others in our name, thanks to the Patriot Act and to other laws enacted since the 9/11 attacks that impinge upon our civil liberties and civil rights. Daniel Ellsberg, who is probably the godfather of all whistleblowers and who revealed the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times in the early 1970s, told me recently that every dirty trick that the Nixon White House did to him is now legal under the Patriot Act. And the Obama Justice Department does it to Americans all over the country, and we have no recourse. So with that said, it's not up to individual prison guards or wardens or private prisons to take away our constitutionally protected and constitutionally mandated civil liberties. But they do. And that's why we need prison legal news. I'm going to tell you very briefly about one of my cellmates, James. James was living in a cardboard box under a bridge in Pittsburgh. And he violated the terms of his probation just so that he could spend the winter months indoors. So on the very first day that he was with us, the first hour, he said, guys, listen, you're not going to have any problems with me, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm mentally ill. He said, I have schizophrenia, I have a seizure disorder, I have depression. So long as I'm on my meds, I'm okay. He said, all right. And it turned out he had a terrific sense of humor. I really enjoyed spending time with him. As crazy as that might sound, hanging out with this homeless guy who was living in a box under the bridge in Pittsburgh, one of the funniest people I've ever met. So poor James. The Bureau of Prisons has to provide you with your medications, right? By law. I mean, this has been decided in the courts. They have to give you your medications. They didn't give James his medication. Now, James was only in through the winter months and was due to be released on the 1st of April of this year, as a matter of fact. So he went down to the medical unit to get his medications, and they gave him Tylenol. And they said, you're leaving in a couple months anyway, just, take the Tylenol, best of luck. He said, I'm not taking Tylenol. I need Dilaudid, Dilantin, whatever it is for seizures. There was an array of medications that he needed for his schizophrenia. And he said, I'm going to truly go nuts if I don't have this medication. He was very worried about it. They told him to get out of there, we're going to lock him up. So he left. He came back to the cell. He said, James, this is unacceptable. You have to file a BP 8.5. What a BP 8.5 is an informal request to settle a dispute. So you file this complaint called a BP 8.5, and it goes to the person that you've had to beef with the idea being you can settle it between the two of you, and it doesn't escalate to higher levels. So the medical officer who gave him the Tylenol told him to go fly a kite. Instead of filing a BP 9, which would then go to the warden, James filed another BP 8.5 because he said the guy was disrespectful while telling him to go fly said kite. That just made the medical officer angry. And so James filed another 8, and another, and another. And every day he would have these 8.5s lined up across the bed. And I said, James, you're not getting anywhere doing the 8.5s. You have to escalate. The 9 goes to the warden, the 10 goes to the regional director, the 11 goes to Bureau of Prisons headquarters. You can't just keep filing 8.5s. Well, what they ended up doing was saying the 8.5s constituted harassment against staff, and they came with 2 cops to the room, they cuffed him behind his back, and they took him to solitary. I really believed he would be in solitary for a day or 2 until he apologized to the medical officer and they just sent him back to the cell. He didn't come back to the cell. So what happened was, one day, about 2 weeks later, there was an incident in solitary, and we went into lockdown. Well, there's this little crack in the door of the unit where if you put your eye just right, you can see down the hall at solitary, which was at the end of the hall leading to my unit. So they locked us in, but I'm looking down this crack, and what looked like a SWAT team was going into solitary. It turned out, corrections officers dressed in black, batons, tasers, I mean the whole production, right? I mean, they all fancy themselves cops anyway, even though they're not. Most of them probably flunked out of the local police academy. They couldn't cut it. But they dressed up in the SWAT gear and t-shirts that, I'll never forget the t-shirts. They had the Bureau of Prisons logo and it said, either you're SWAT or you're not. Well, guess what? You're not. You're not SWAT. You're just a local yokel. You're not trained in this. Anyway, so they go into the SWAT, into the solitary, and then the CO shooed me away from the little crack in the door. A few days later, one of the members of the Pisces gang told me he wanted to see me. So I went up to his room, and he said, hey, your friend James is really messed up down there. I said, what happened down there the other day anyway? Because this member of the Pisces was in solitary at the same time James was on a gambling charge. So he said, you know, in solitary, medical comes to your cell every day to make sure you're okay. But what they did to James, because he was harassing them, is they would go around to all the cells and then they would skip James's cell. And it made him angry. And after the second day of doing this, he got angrier. And then he started to go nuts, just like he had warned everybody was going to happen. So Jesus, this Pisces, told me, one night, James started singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, okay? Which was funny for 5 minutes. But he did it all night long and never stopped. And people were screaming obscenities and shut up. And what he ended up doing was he stood on his bunk, he took off his slipper, and he used the slipper to hit the sprinkler. When he hit the sprinkler, it turned on the sprinklers in all the cells in solitary. And that's why they called him the SWAT team. So Jesus told me they tased him until he was knocked out. Then they stripped him naked, and then they threw him outside in the little dog cages that they give you to exercise in. We just walk in a circle. That's your 1 hour of exercise. You're in this 10 by 12 foot dog cage. But it was 0 degrees. I mean, this is January we're talking about in the mountains of central Pennsylvania. He was naked after having been tased. And Jesus said that at first James apologized. And then he started begging. And then he started crying. And then he fainted in the snow. And they brought him back in. And he just didn't speak for the rest of his time in Loretto. That is illegal. That is torture. There are laws against this kind of behavior. But when you're in prison, there's no one to turn to. But there is prison legal news. I am not overstating things when I say that prison legal news saves lives. It is impossible to say how many times a prison guard has not beaten somebody because they don't want to see it in prison legal news. It's impossible to calculate how many prison employees have decided to actually follow the rules because they don't want to see their own malfeasance in prison legal news. Even more importantly, it's impossible to say how many members of prison medical staffs do give the proper medication because they don't want to see it in prison legal news. And that is having a real impact on people's lives. That's defending human rights. And that's something that I think this organization should be incredibly proud of. So that's why I am so honored to be here tonight. I am honored to be associated with this organization. There's still a lot of work to be done. I hope you will include me in that work. I look forward to it. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for coming, and have a great night.